Ambassador Velcaris felt his heart stop the instant the proximity alarm screamed. He had crossed 40,000 light-years to reach the system, carrying 12,000 years of unbroken peace in his chest like a sacred flame. The Conclave had sent into Earth with a single, simple mission: welcome humanity's fledgling civilization into galactic community, guide them gently, and teach them. As the Conclave had taught 100 species before, that war was a childhood disease every species eventually outgrew. He was not prepared for what greeted him instead. The scanner display flickered, recalculated, flickered again, as if it refused to believe its own readings. Velcaris leaned closer, his long fingers trembling against the console, where his briefing documents predicted a scattering of primitive orbital stations and perhaps a handful of exploratory vessels. The screen instead filled, row after row, cluster after cluster, with warships. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. They hung in the void around the blue planet like a silent, patient storm cloud, their hulls dark and angular, bristling with weapon batteries that dwarfed anything the Conclave's ceremonial defense fleet had ever built. Velcaris's translator unit, straining to process the tactical broadcast frequencies leaking from the formation, began spitting out designations: carrier group, siege cruiser, orbital bastion, strike wing. Words for things his people had no true equivalent for, because the Conclave had never needed them. This cannot be a young species, he thought, his mind reeling. This is an armed civilization bracing for annihilation. That was the first turning point. The moment Velcaris understood, with cold and total certainty, that everything the Conclave believed about humanity was wrong. His shuttle's comm system crackled to life before he could compose himself. A voice, calm and unhurried, cut through the silence. Unidentified vessel. You have entered a restricted defense perimeter. Transmit your registration and intent, or you will be escorted out. There was no panic in the voice. No excitement at first contact with an alien civilization. No reverence. No fear. Just procedure. Just readiness. Velcaris had expected humanity's first words to the galaxy to be full of wonder. Instead, he was being treated like a potential threat to be processed and filed. He transmitted the Conclave's diplomatic credentials, and after a tense pause, was granted clearance to descend. As his shuttle broke through the atmosphere, escorted by 4 sleek interceptors that matched his speed with unsettling precision, Velcaris opened humanity's public historical archive, hoping to understand what he had just witnessed. What he found was the second turning point of his journey, and it chilled him far more than the fleet had. Earth, he learned, had spent the majority of its recorded history at war with itself. Not skirmishes, not isolated conflicts. Centuries of industrialized warfare, entire generations raised, trained, and consumed by the machinery of conflict. Humanity had built these very warships, the same colossal vessels now hanging silently in orbit, not to conquer the stars, but to conquer each other. Continents had bled for resources, ideologies, borders that no longer even existed. And when humanity finally united under a single global government less than 2 centuries ago, they had not disarmed, they had refined. Every terrible lesson learned in those internal wars, every doctrine of logistics, discipline, deterrence, and overwhelming force had been preserved, sharpened, and redirected outward toward the silent unknown of space. Humanity hadn't waited for an enemy to arrive before preparing for one. They had assumed, from the very beginning, that the universe was as dangerous as their own history had taught them it could be. Velcaris closed the archive with shaking hands. The Conclave had achieved 12,000 years of peace by forgetting war was possible. Humanity had achieved unity by refusing to forget it for even a single day. His shuttle touched down on a landing platform in a coastal city, gleaming towers rising around him in the dying light of sunset. A small honor guard waited, disciplined and silent, and at its center stood a woman whose presence seemed to press against the air itself. "Ambassador Velcaris," she said, extending a hand in a human greeting gesture his briefing had prepared him for. "Admiral Nina Carver, welcome to Earth." Her eyes were the third turning point. Steady, appraising, utterly without malice, and yet carrying the unmistakable weight of someone who had made peace with terrible decisions long before this meeting. She did not look at him the way a young species looks at an elder civilization. She looked at him the way a soldier looks at anyone new, assessing, calculating, already 3 steps ahead. Admiral, Velcaris managed, his diplomatic training struggling to catch up with his racing thoughts. I came expecting to meet a civilization taking its first steps into the stars. Carver's expression didn't change, but something in her voice softened just slightly. Ambassador! We stopped taking careful first steps a long time ago. We learned to run before we learned to walk, and it nearly destroyed us. Everything you saw up there, she gestured toward the darkening sky, exists so that never happens again, to us or to anyone who asks for help. Velcaris said nothing, but as he followed her into the city, past silent, watchful faces, he could not shake the feeling that he had not arrived to civilize a young species. He had arrived at the doorstep of something the galaxy was not remotely prepared for. The banquet hall was quiet in a way that unsettled Velcaris more than the warships had. He had expected celebration. First contact was supposed to be a moment of triumph, toasted across 100 worlds, remembered as the day 2 civilizations reached across the dark and found each other. Instead, he sat across from Admiral Carver and a rotating cast of grim-faced officials, all of whom treated the historic occasion with the calm efficiency of a routine briefing. "You seem troubled, Ambassador," Carver said, watching him pick at unfamiliar food. "I am trying to reconcile what I was told about your species with what I am seeing," Velcaris admitted. "Our records, gathered from decades of passive observation, suggested a civilization on the edge of interplanetary flight. Curious, divided, vulnerable. Not this." Carver set down her glass. "How much do you actually know about our history?" "I know your planet endured conflict," Velcaris said carefully. "I did not understand the scale. That was when the first turning point of the evening arrived, not from Carver, but from a projection she activated above the table." Velcaris watched, heart sinking, as centuries of human history unfolded in silent, brutal montage. Entire cities reduced to ash, weapons capable of ending millions of lives in an instant, built and stockpiled by rival factions who trusted no one, least of all each other. Generations who knew nothing but the machinery of war, passed down like inheritance. "We nearly ended ourselves twice," Carver said quietly, "before we ever looked at the stars. The only reason we're sitting here, having this conversation, is that enough of us finally understood something our ancestors refused to accept. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's a structure. It has to be built, defended, and maintained, or it collapses the moment someone decides it's convenient to break it." Velcaris thought of the conclave, 12,000 years of harmony, built on the assumption that any species advanced enough to reach the stars would naturally abandon violence. "My people believe the opposite," he said. "That true peace comes from setting aside the tools of war entirely. We maintain no meaningful military. We haven't needed one." Something flickered across Carver's face. Not judgment, but something closer to concern. "That's either the safest galaxy that's ever existed," she said, "or the most fragile piece I've ever heard of." The words settled over Velcaris like a stone. The second turning point came the following day, when Carver personally escorted him to an orbital shipyard, one of dozens ringing the planet. Velcaris stood at an observation window as a warship larger than any conclave structure took shape below, swarming with construction drones, its hull humming with barely restrained power. "This is the Odin class," Carver explained. "Flagship of Battle Group Odin, our primary rapid response fleet. We built ships like this to fight each other once. Now we build them to make sure we never have to fight anyone, because no one sane start a war they cannot win. And if someone insane does?" Velcaris asked. Carver's silence was answer enough. He spent the following days touring training facilities, command centers, deep space monitoring arrays that stretched humanity's awareness far beyond its own solar system. Everywhere he went, he found the same philosophy repeated in different forms. Prepare relentlessly, hope constantly, never assume safety was guaranteed. It was so alien to the Conclave's worldview that Velcaris began drafting, then discarding a dozen different reports back home, unsure how to explain a species that had weaponized its own trauma into readiness rather than despair. It was during a quiet moment in Carver's command office, 3 days into his visit, that the third and most unsettling turning point occurred. An aide entered without knocking, tablet in hand, face pale. "Admiral," We're picking up a distress signal. Long range, deep space relay. It's addressed to the ambassador. Velkaris' translator activated automatically, and the message filled the room in his own language, garbled by distance and static, but unmistakably urgent. This is Elder Consul Thero of the Conclave, Ambassador Velkaris. If you receive this transmission, the Verith Dominion has crossed into conclave space. We are requesting immediate. The signal dissolved into static. Velkaris stood frozen, every certainty he had carried across the stars collapsing at once. The Conclave, the oldest, most peaceful civilization in the galaxy, was under attack, and they had no way to defend themselves. Carver was already moving, issuing orders in a low, controlled voice, but Velkaris barely heard her. All he could think of was the 12,000 years of peace he had believed was permanent, now hanging by a thread he never imagined could be cut. "Ambassador," Carver said, turning to face him, her expression unreadable. "Tell me about the Verith Dominion. Right now, everything you know." Velkaris opened his mouth, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, he was grateful humanity had never stopped preparing for the worst. Elder Consul Thero had never seen the sky burn. For 12,000 years, the skies above the conclave homeworld of Onvatha had held nothing but starlight and the slow, graceful passage of ceremonial vessels. Beautiful ships built for diplomacy, art, and observation, never for war. Thero had spent his long life studying philosophy in the crystal spires of the capital, believing, as every conclave citizen believed, that the galaxy had grown wise enough to leave violence behind. That belief died in the first 3 minutes of the invasion. It began with a whisper, a conclave sensor drone at the edge of the system registering unusual gravitational distortions, easily dismissed as a natural phenomenon. Then came the first turning point. The sky above Onvatha's capital fractured open, and the Verith Dominion's invasion fleet tore through, hundreds of warships materializing in perfect battle formation, their hulls jagged and predatory, utterly unlike anything the Conclave had ever built or imagined needing to build. There was no declaration, no warning, no attempt at communication. Orbital bombardment began within moments, precise strikes targeting the Conclave's scattered ceremonial fleet, vessels never designed to withstand real combat, let alone an ambush of this magnitude. Thero watched from the consul's tower as 3 of the Conclave's oldest and most revered ships, each centuries old, each a symbol of the civilization's enduring peace, were vaporized in single, contemptuous strikes. "Deploy the defense fleet," someone shouted uselessly, and Thero felt a horrible, hollow laugh building in his chest, because there was no defense fleet. There had never been a need for one. The Conclave had disarmed its consciousness so thoroughly that it no longer possessed a vocabulary of war, let alone the tools of it. That was the second turning point, and it was the cruelest. The realization, spreading to the capital in waves of panic, that 12,000 years of peace had left them utterly, catastrophically defenseless. Citizens who had never witnessed violence in their lives poured into the streets, looking to the sky, looking to their leaders, looking for a plan that did not exist. Verith landing craft began descending toward the capital's outer districts, their intent unmistakable. Reports flooded in from a dozen other conclave worlds. The invasion was not isolated to Onvatha. It was systemic, coordinated, and utterly without mercy. The Verith Dominion, whoever they were, had studied their target with patience and precision, and struck at the exact moment the conclave was most vulnerable, while its most experienced ambassador was 100,000 light-years away. Thero forced himself to move, half carried by aides down into the fortified communications bunker beneath the capital, a relic from an era so ancient most citizens didn't know existed. As explosions rattled dust from the ceiling, he stared at the ancient long-range relay array, humanity's coordinates already logged from Velkaris' initial departure transmission days earlier. This was the third and most desperate turning point of all. Every Principal Thero had spent his life defending screamed against what he was about to do. The Conclave did not ask for military intervention. The Conclave did not celebrate strength or violence. To call for armed help was to admit that everything his civilization believed about the nature of peace had been, in some fundamental way, naive. But the alternative was extinction. His hands trembled over the console as he composed a message, knowing it might never arrive in time, knowing humanity might not even possess the capability to help even if it wanted to, knowing that reaching out to a species he barely understood was a gamble built entirely on desperation rather than strategy. "This is Elder Consul Thur of the Conclave," he transmitted, his voice steadier than he felt. "Ambassador Velcaris, if you receive this transmission, the Verit Dominion has crossed into Conclave space. We are requesting immediate—" The bunker shook violently as a strike landed somewhere above, severing the relay mid-transmission. Thayer was thrown to the floor, ears ringing, dust and debris raining down around him. When he finally pulled himself upright, the console was dark, dead, its connection to the stars severed. He had no way of knowing if the message had reached anyone at all. Above him, through cracks now forming in the bunker's ancient ceiling, he could hear the distant thunder of Verith landing craft touching down across the capital, and beneath that sound, quieter but somehow more terrible, the screams of civilization that had never once, in 12,000 years, prepared for this moment. Thayer closed his eyes and, for the first time in his long life, prayed to no god of philosophy or wisdom, but simply hoped, with everything he had left, that somewhere among the stars, someone was listening. Velcaris had never felt so utterly powerless. He stood in Admiral Carver's command center, surrounded by humans moving with brisk, purposeful urgency, while every instinct in his body screamed that he should be doing something, anything, to help his people. Instead, he could only watch his technicians work to boost a fragmented signal, try to extract more information from Elder Consul Thayer's severed transmission. "The signal's too degraded to pull a location fix from," a technician reported. "But cross-referencing it against the ambassador's travel logs, we can extrapolate the Conclave's general territory. It's a long way out, Admiral. Even at our fastest sustained speeds, we're looking at a significant transit time." Carver turned to Velcaris. "How long has your civilization been without a functioning military?" The question landed like a blow. 12,000 years, Velcaris said quietly. "We have ceremonial vessels, observation craft, nothing built for combat." He watched understanding settle across Carver's face, and with it, something that looked uncomfortably like the confirmation of a suspicion she'd held since their very first meeting. "Then whoever's attacking you knows exactly what they're doing," she said. "This isn't a border skirmish. This is a civilization that identified the most vulnerable major power in the galaxy and moved on at the moment they had an opening." Velcaris felt something inside him, some deep, foundational piece of his identity as a diplomat of peace, begin to crack. This was the first turning point in his darkest hours on Earth. The dawning realization that the Conclave's philosophy, the very belief system he had traveled across the galaxy to share with humanity, had made his people a target rather than a beacon. "Admiral," he said, his voice raw, "I have no right to ask this of your species. We arrived expecting to teach humanity the virtues of abandoning war. I cannot, in good conscience, now beg you to wage one on our behalf." Carver studied him for a long moment. "Ambassador, do you know why we built fleets like the one orbiting this planet, even after we finally found peace among ourselves?" Velcaris shook his head. "Because peace without the will to defend it isn't peace," she said. "It's just borrowed time. You didn't come here to teach us anything, Velcaris, but maybe we can teach each other something, starting today." She turned to her staff. "Get me a direct line to the Joint Defense Council. Now." That set the second turning point into motion. A tense, hour-long emergency session Velcaris was permitted to witness remotely as human military and civilian leadership argued fiercely over the question of intervention. Some voices were cautious, wary of committing humanity's most powerful fleet to a conflict on the far side of the galaxy against an enemy they knew almost nothing about in defense of a species they had known for less than a week. "We don't even know what the Verit Dominion is capable of," one counselor argued. "We could be walking battle group, Odin into a trap we don't understand." "We know exactly what they're capable of," Carver countered, her voice cutting through the debate like a blade. "They just proved it by annihilating a civilization that couldn't fight back. That's not a mystery. That's a pattern. And if we let it stand unanswered, we're telling every hostile power in this galaxy that humanity only defends its own doorstep." The council chamber fell silent. Velcaris, watching from the sidelines, understood in that moment that Carver wasn't simply arguing for the Conclave's survival. She was arguing for a principle. That strength divorced from responsibility was no different than the very violence humanity had spent centuries trying to leave behind. The vote, when it finally came, was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Within the hour, Carver stood before Valkyris once more, her expression set with the calm, immovable resolve he had first glimpsed on the landing platform days ago. "Battle Group Odin is mobilizing," she said. "We're bringing the fleet you saw in orbit, plus reinforcements from 3 additional battle groups. We leave within the hour." Valkyris felt something he hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, but a fierce, aching gratitude that threatened to overwhelm his composure. "Why?" he asked. "Why commit so much, so quickly, for a species you've known for days?" Carver's answer became the third and most defining turning point of the entire crisis, one that would echo in Valkyris' mind for the rest of his life. "Because somewhere out there, an admiral of yours sent a message into the dark, not knowing if anyone would hear it," she said. "And because we decided a long time ago that if we ever became powerful enough to answer a call like that, we would." She turned and strode toward the command deck, already issuing launch orders, and Valkyris followed, watching to the viewport as, one by one, the colossal shapes of Battle Group Odin began to move, not toward another conflict born of conquest or ambition, but toward a desperate plea for help, answered by a species of galaxy it almost entirely misunderstood. The Verith Dominion's fleet commander, Overlord Keswick, did not believe the reports at first. His forces had spent 3 days systematically dismantling the Conclave's remaining resistance, a task that had proven laughably easy against a civilization with no functioning military to speak of. Conclave worlds fell one after another, their populations too shocked and unprepared to mount anything resembling a defense. It was, by every measure Keswick used to judge conquest, the most efficient campaign of his career. Then the sensors detected an anomaly at the edge of the system, a fleet arriving not through the erratic, gravity-tearing method the Verith used, but through smooth, disciplined, controlled transit, hundreds of vessels emerging in perfect formation, their design unlike anything in the Dominion's extensive intelligence archives. "Unknown fleet, identify yourselves," Keswick's communications officer transmitted, more out of procedure than concern. The response came from a single voice, calm and utterly without fear. "This is Admiral Nina Carver of the Earth Defense Fleet, commanding Battle Group Odin. You are ordered to cease hostilities against the Conclave and withdraw from the system immediately." Keswick laughed. The first turning point of the battle to come, though he did not yet know it. An unknown species, appearing from nowhere, demanding the surrender of a fleet that had just conquered 6 worlds without losing a single meaningful engagement? It was absurd, arrogant. He assumed, as any commander in his position might, that this newcomer was either monumentally foolish or attempting a desperate bluff on behalf of the Conclave. Decline, he transmitted back, already ordering a portion of his fleet to reposition and eliminate the intruders as an afterthought to his ongoing campaign. Destroy them. Let this be a lesson to anyone else who considers interfering. 40 Verith warships broke formation and surged toward Battle Group Odin, weapons charging, confident in the overwhelming numerical and technological superiority that had carried them through every engagement of the war so far. They never reached firing range. What happened next became known, in the years afterward, as the second and most decisive turning point of the entire conflict, the moment the galaxy's understanding of humanity changed forever. Carver's voice, calm and unhurried even as the Verith ships accelerated toward her formation, issued a single order. "Odin flight, target their command vessels. Fire." Battle Group Odin's opening volley was not a broad, chaotic exchange of weapons fire. It was surgical, precise. Every calculation drawn from centuries of doctrine forged in humanity's own brutal history. Strike the head, and the body falls into disarray. In the span of seconds, 3 Verith command ships, the coordinating nerve centers of the attacking force, erupted into silent bursts of light and debris, their destruction so swift and total that the remaining Verith vessels had no time to adjust, no time to regroup, no time to even fully process what happened. Keswick stared at his tactical display in disbelief as the readouts confirmed the impossible. 40 ships, sent to eliminate an insignificant nuisance, had been reduced to a scattered, leaderless mess in under a minute, without Battle Group Odin sustaining a single meaningful loss. That, Carver transmitted, her voice carrying not triumph, but something colder and more final. Was your only warning. Panic rippled through the Verith fleet as battle group Odin advanced, its formation tightening with terrifying discipline. Keswick, scrambling to salvage the situation, ordered a full fleet engagement, throwing every remaining vessel into a desperate assault. It was, in hindsight, the worst decision of his career. Humanity's warships, built and refined across generations of internal conflict humanity, had sworn never to repeat, moved with a coordinated brutality the Verith had never encountered. Where the Dominion fought with raw numbers and aggression, Battle Group Odin fought with the accumulated, hard-earned wisdom of a species that had once turned those very same weapons on itself, and had spent every day since learning exactly how to end a fight as quickly and decisively as possible. The third and final turning point came less than 20 minutes later, when the last of the Verith capital ships, its hull scarred and venting atmosphere, transmitted a broken, desperate surrender signal across every frequency it could reach. Keswick, his flagship crippled and adrift, stared out at the wreckage of what had, hours earlier, been an unstoppable invasion force. Around him, Battle Group Odin held his formation with unnerving calm, not pressing the advantage further than necessary, not annihilating what remained of his fleet out of vengeance or spectacle. Cease all hostile action, Carver's voice transmitted, steady as ever. Surrender your remaining forces, and we will permit medical evacuation of your wounded. Continue fighting, and we will finish what you started. Keswick, for the first time in his long and violent career, gave the order to stand down. Far below, on the shattered surface of Onvatha, Elder Consul Theru emerged from the ruins of the communications bunker to see the sky, once burning with invasion, now filled with the silent, protective shapes of unfamiliar warships standing guard. Help had come. The days that followed the battle revealed a side of humanity that Velcaris had not expected. Even after everything he had already witnessed, Battle Group Odin did not depart once the Verith forces surrendered. Instead, human vessels descended into conclave airspace on missions that bore no resemblance to conquest or occupation. Medical frigates deployed to shattered cities, their crews working alongside stunned conclave healers to treat the wounded. Transport vessels ferried food, shelter materials, and emergency supplies to millions of displaced citizens across a dozen ravaged worlds. Engineering teams began the painstaking work of stabilizing damaged infrastructure, asking nothing in return beyond permission to help. Velcaris stood on the observation deck of Admiral Carver's flagship, watching human shuttles crisscross the wounded skies of Onvatha, and felt the first turning point of his final days on this journey settle over him, not shock this time, but something closer to humility. "I expected you to leave once the battle was won," he admitted to Carver, who had joined him at the viewport. "Victory achieved, mission complete." "Victory isn't the mission," Carver said simply. "The mission was making sure your people survived. That doesn't end the moment the shooting stops." Over the following weeks, Velcaris watched human personnel work tirelessly beside conclave citizens who had, only days earlier, regarded humanity's very existence with unease. He watched children, orphaned by the invasion, receive care from human medics who worked through exhaustion without complaint. He watched engineers rebuild not just structures, but confidence, teaching conclave technicians methods of fortification and defense that the ancient civilization had never needed to learn, freely share without condition or demand for gratitude. It was during a quiet evening, sitting with Carver in the ruins of what had once been the consul's tower, now half rebuilt with human engineering support, that Velcaris experienced the second and most profound turning point of his entire mission. "I came here to teach your species that true peace requires abandoning the tools of war," he confessed. "I believed with absolute certainty that strength and virtue could not coexist, that any civilization holding on to weapons had not yet learned to let go of violence. And now," Carver asked. Velcaris looked out at the skyline, where human and conclave workers labored side by side beneath the glow of reconstruction lights. "Now I understand that my people didn't achieve peace. We simply avoided the moment that would have tested whether we deserved to keep it. You didn't build your fleets because you loved war, Admiral. You built them because you understood, in a way we refuse to, that peace has to be defended by someone willing to bear that terrible burden, so that everyone else never has to." Carver said nothing for a long moment, then offered the smallest, weariest smile Velcaris had seen from her since their first meeting. That's the whole idea, Ambassador. We don't prepare for war because we want it. We prepare because the alternative is standing helpless when it finds us anyway. Weeks later, as Battle Group Odin prepared to return home, having stabilized the last of the Conclave's shattered worlds and secured commitments of mutual defense cooperation between the two civilizations, Velcaris stood before the Conclave's surviving elders, Thero among them, to deliver the report that would define the rest of his life. This was a third and final turning point, not of battle or crisis, but of understanding. For 12,000 years, Velcaris told the assembled council, we believed advanced civilizations naturally outgrow warfare, and that any species holding on to its weapons had failed to reach true wisdom. We were wrong. Humanity did not conquer the stars first. They conquered themselves, their own history, their own worst instincts. And in doing so, learned something we never had the chance to learn. That peace is not a gift you simply receive and keep forever. It is a promise you renew every day, defended by those willing to carry its weight. He paused, looking around at the faces of elders who had spent their entire lives believing something fundamentally different. We did not find a young civilization in need of our guidance, he continued. We found guardians, a species that chose compassion not because they were incapable of violence, but because they had mastered it so completely that violence became a choice rather than a fate. I urge this council to abandon the belief that strength and peace are opposites. Our survival, and perhaps the survival of countless other worlds, depends on understanding what humanity already knows. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the quiet hum of reconstruction work continuing outside, human and conclave hands working together beneath a sky that, for the first time since the invasion, held nothing more threatening than starlight. Elder Consul Thero rose slowly to his feet, his voice carrying the weight of everything his civilization had survived. Then let it be recorded, he said, that on this day, the Conclave learned the difference between a civilization that has never known war and one that has faced it, mastered it, and chosen peace anyway. Far above, in the quiet dark between the stars, Battle Group Odin began its long journey home. Not as conquerors, not as saviors seeking glory, but simply as guardians who understood, better than anyone, that the price of peace was always someone's willingness to stand ready to defend it.